Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm looking forward to sharing some art history with you today and taking a virtual trip to Star Island and the Shoals. Okay, well, a little bit about my background and as far as the Shoals go, I'm from Long Island. Um, I am a painter and a writer. And I grew up on the shore, North Shore, um, going to the bay. It's not the ocean where I was from; it's Oyster Bay. But I spent long hours on the shore in Oyster Bay, walking and dreaming. And I think it's probably in my blood. My ancestors have come from coastal Scotland, so I think it's almost the same kind of landscape there, rocky ocean. So I came up to New Hampshire to study poetry at UNH, the graduate program there, and I heard about Star Island through poetry connections and in particular Star Arts. And I started coming out just to enjoy the um, the vibe of Star Island well before I was ever a painter. I've only been a painter for 13 years. Prior to that, I was involved in writing, but I've been coming out to the Shoals for I don't know, maybe 20 years. I've put as a painter, I'm a full-time self-supporting painter, and I run teaching workshops as well as sell my work in galleries. And I've been running workshops out on Star Island for several years. And this last year, I got involved in creating a new program called the Artist in Residence on Star Island, in which artists are invited out for a week to do what they do: paint, watercolor, acrylic, oil, whatever, and interact with guests for a week. And it's a way of hooking back into the Shoals' rich history of creative souls, both artists and writers who've been coming out and enjoying the beauty of the Shoals. So that is my connection. So you probably, if you know anything about the arts and relationship to Isles of Shoals, you probably know that Childe Hassam was a frequent visitor, and most of his best known work, I think, is of Appledore and the Shoals. But there's a whole host of other artists before Childe Hassam and after who have done really remarkable work of the Isles of Shoals. And so by giving a survey of this history, we'll also be kind of looking at art, the history of art in America in a kind of microcosmic level. We'll see through the various styles of painting the Shoals, we'll see the arc of the American tradition, from its sort of English and other European classicism through Romanticism and the influence of French Impressionism, of which Childe Hassam is the shining star, and right into throughout the modern 20th century and into contemporary painting. So without further ado, this is Arthur Quartley's Isles of Shoals from the Mouth of Portsmouth Harbor. And it's 1873. And as you all know, on your way out to Star, you always pass that lighthouse there. That Whaleback Light is what it's called, right at the mouth of the Piscataqua River. And I'd always wondered about those two parts to it. There's only one tower now, but there used to be, apparently, well, the history of lighthouse is actually kind of interesting. So in 1830, the first lighthouse was built out of stone, only it was so poorly constructed that the first high tide came in or whatever, the first storm, and it started washing away some of the foundational rock. And the whole thing was just constantly threatening to collapse. And so it was enclosed in wood, which is what you see in the bottom left there. That is a wooden tower around the original stone tower, which is beneath there. And when Quartley painted in 1873, when he painted it, there were two towers, because that is the original on the left, as well as the new tower, which they built just in a year prior to his painting that in 1872. So for a short time, the two lighthouses, the old and the new, were side by side, and that's when Quartley captured it. After 1875 or so, I think, they knocked down the second one, and they built a fog signal there, which you see in a picture in 1878. It's pretty cool to see how faithful he was to the to what was there, as well as, you know, giving us a really romantic, sort of serene, sort of majestic glimpse of the shoals across across the harbor, across the ocean there. This is a painting by a fellow named James Butterworth called "Picking Up the Pilot," or "Shipping Off the Isles of Shoals." And it's from about 1850. So Butterworth was born in England and moved to America about 5 years before he painted this. And it's a great example of the classical tradition in European painting coming over to an American, North American subject matter. Here's another one, also with the white light, White Island light there. And I'm going to show you what I mean by how classical this really is. On the left, you see the two paintings by Butterworth, and on the right is a seascape, a Dutch seascape from 1645. So not a lot changed between 1645 and 1850 with this style of painting. If you look at it's almost as though the composition is just almost exact. It's just flipped, right? Because you have a larger ship on the right with a smaller one on the left, both attacking at the same direction in the breeze, and then something smaller off in the corner in each case. It's also, I wanted to note that the way he's framed this with the ocean, you'll notice that in both the Butterworth and the Dutch painting, it's a dark, sort of, it's called a repoussoir, actually, that is sort of a dark wall, a wall of shadow, where we have to sort of leap over, our eyes sort of go over that ledge into the rest of the painting. And that's a convention that is still practiced in painting. Here's a similar idea, and the darkness is in the foreground, and the light is further back. But this is a much more romantic painting than these. What makes it romantic? It's nature, and it's nature in its moody, almost spiritual manifestation. This is an example of the Dusseldorf School, which is a German academy that during the 1830s and 40s became a major influence on painting, not just in Europe, but in the United States. A number of the landscape painters who would become the Hudson River School in America studied first at the Dusseldorf School in Germany. And there they learned to paint outside to do their studies, but they didn't consider their plein air paintings to be finished. They were merely studies to be worked up into full-size paintings in the studio. And in that working up, they would go deep into the details, into how light actually behaves, but also into the drama of light and dark and motion. And there's often an allegorical or religious aspect to the paintings from this school. So rather than just simply giving us a sort of tame, there's storms here, and yet there's a certain serenity. It's classical. Everything's sort of placed just perfectly. But here you get sort of the wildness of nature unleashed. And so there's this feeling of the romantic, of the otherworldly within the worldly, in a way. It's like when they painted ideas intermingled with the visual, and the mundane was transformed into visual parables.
Chris,
Yes.
what's the size of that painting? Do you have any idea?
I don't know. I would imagine, though, it's probably, it's not huge. I'd say it's not going to be huge. I imagine it's probably like maybe 30 by 40, you know? It's not a small easel painting. It's a studio painting, but it's not a massive cinematic, you know, Bierstadt either. It's somewhere in between.
It's almost impressionistic.
It is wild. Yeah, and the more you study, the more you go into the Dusseldorf stuff, it's fascinating because it's so detailed, and yet it's got so much drama in all of the stuff that comes out of there. It's really cool kind of painting. Here's another example of the Dusseldorf style coming to America, quite literally, from Dutch painter Moritz de Haas. And he studied at the Dusseldorf School, but he moved to New York City in the 1850s. And the painting that you see on the right is a painting of the Isles of Shoals. You can see the white island light out there, but it's got the same drama and deep level of detail as the other German Romantic paintings we just looked at. And I put this one next to it, Alfred Wahlberg from the Dusseldorf School, to emphasize that even the palette is very much of the school. It's a Dusseldorf palette, which it is characterized by kind of muted, very even colors, a very kind of like a harmonious, it's almost monochromatic, but not, obviously not, but it has that kind of a feeling to it because the colors are very closely related to each other. Here's another De Haas in which that's not so true. Here he's painting the shoals in lifelike color, but still with great drama. Look how he's foregrounded the waves lashing against the rocks there. I think I know where those rocks are. I think I've painted those rocks. It's interesting, the perspective though of the, you're so close to the rocks, but we're out in the water. And obviously that's Miss Underhill's chair there in the background. But so it makes me wonder, like, was he on a boat when he did the sketch for this? I don't know, but it would suggest as much. It would suggest that we're in the water. There's another De Haas. He's adopted that same repertoire framework of using the shadows of the waves in the foreground in order to get us off into the painting where all the action's happening. Great romantic paintings. Another De Haas. Romantics love the moonlight too. And here's a moonlight of the Shoals, not by De Haas, simply an American, Alfred Perkins. And here's a painting by John Appleton Brown of this somewhat similar in feel to that previous to Hass. And John Appleton Brown is an interesting guy. He's related to another fellow we're going to look at, Alfred T. Britcher, and they're both sort of local boys. He was born in Newburyport, some say Newbury, but he definitely went to school in Newburyport, where he studied with Alfred T. Britcher, who's a Portsmouth painter who we're going to see in a minute. And he studied with William Morris Hunt, who also figures prominently in all of this, in the Art of the Shoals. And he also studied in France in 1874. So this is before he studied in France, but probably while he was studying with Hunt. So John Appleton Brown became friends with Childe Hassam, who probably Hunt introduced him to. And we'll get to see his style sort of shift over time. This, I think, is an engraving, but it's supposedly one of his better known works. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a color picture of it online, so we'll have to use our imaginations. Storm at the Isles of Shoals. I love this painting. It's just it's so sweet. I mean, I like the oval format and the colors and the composition. There's a kind of big S-curve hidden in this painting too. If you look at the bottom edge of the top cloud, where you can see the sky through it, you follow it to the lighthouse, and then around the edge of the rock, around the water, it's kind of a lovely kind of yin-yang like quality to this painting. White Island Light, Isles of Shoals, Harrison Bird Brown. He was just another famous American landscape painter. He's not that famous, but born in Portland, mostly painted Maine, coastal Maine. Robert Swain Gifford, 1868, better known for his White Mountain work, but seems to have stopped off at the Shoals at one point. And here's a painting by Warren Shepherd of the Shoals, of the same cliffs on the other side of Star, but from the other side. That's the Miss Underhill's chair. And Warren Shepherd was born in New Jersey, and he studied with DeHaas, who we looked at earlier. He himself was the son of a ship's captain, and he was sort of taught to respect and love the sea. And much of his work is sea-based, but he was wonderful at the ships. And in fact, he started a sort of side gig later on in life as a designer of yachts, and even raced in yacht races, winning the it was New York to Bermuda race twice. Here's Quartley again. Quartley doesn't fit into any, it doesn't fit neatly into any categories. He's kind of between movements. And, but he toyed with, so he toyed with Romanticism, he toyed with what became known as the Hudson River School, and I'm going to show you that next. So this is DeHaas once more, A Fine Day on the Cliffs of Star Island. I love the people with the parasol up there, looking out. And here you can see again this. So here's a guy who studied at the Dusseldorf School, and came to America and applied some of the same principles to American landscape. And the here's Quartley doing something rather similar. It's this sort of elongated format that gives you a feeling of expansiveness, and that's sort of the romanticism in it. Even the way the little figures are included on the cliffs here and in the previous painting shows you a little glimpse of a kind of poetic comment, perhaps, on the relationship of humanity to the human to the scale of the universe, you know, the scale of nature, how small we are. And that's an aspect of Romanticism, that the idea of nature, a harmony with nature as a possibility, but also the feeling of the sublime, the sense of insignificance of the human in the face of the impersonal forces of nature. So here you get a kind of, the shoals lend themselves to this kind of painting, I think, because you can have the human in the ships and in the figures, but you have great, you know, cliffs, rocks, and crashing waves, just real elemental, primal, you know, natural setting. So it's an exciting prospect for artists. So this is a painting by William Tross Richards called Shoal Water. I'm not sure it's the shoals. It doesn't really look, it's hard to say because it's just ocean. But I put it in here because I wanted to give a really good example of Hudson River School painting, seascapes in particular. Hudson River School is basically landscapes. It's mostly mountains around the Catskills, but also in New Hampshire, the White Mountains. It's the primary mode of painting in America during the first half of the 19th century. And it translates to seascapes, again, as in giving you this sense of expansiveness, this majesty that is a characteristic of all Hudson River School painting, the beauty and almost this cinematic appreciation of the vastness of the landscape, and a kind of symbolic spiritualization of the landscape as well. So William Tross Richards came to Appledore in 1869, 71, and 72. What he's painted here is New Jersey shore, but it's a great example again of the Hudson River style and of something called luminism, which is the a kind of second half of or the latter period of Hudson River School painting is concerned not so much with physical landscape as with light and luminosity in particular, not just for the interest of optical effects, but for, I think, the suggestion of the spiritual, the transcendent. But this right here, in contrast, is just a straight up study that William Tross Richards did out on the shoals. It's just a watercolor and gouache. And William Tross Richards was one of those Americans who did study at the Dusseldorf School, but took those ideas of the romanticizing of nature and did something different with them. Created a new kind of luminosity and a new feeling. That's one of his better known paintings. Not the shoals, but a great example, again, of the beauty and spiritual feeling of nature. Little ship on the horizon, vast, vast castles in the sky. Now we come to Alfred Thompson Britcher, White Island Lighthouse. And Britcher is a Portsmouth boy, was a Portsmouth boy. This is 1883, so this is, again, the sort of waning years of the Hudson River School. And that's a magnificent painting of his. It's not the shoals, but it is Gorgeous, don't you think? Time and Tide. So Richard was, like I said, born in Portsmouth, studied in Newburyport, was a businessman mostly, and then studied at the Lowell Academy in his spare time. Um, Private studies with Bierstadt and with William Morris Hunt. He's the fellow that the other painter I mentioned was studying with, Chapleton Brown. And his style changed quite a bit after he met Hunt and became enamored of French Impressionism. I'm pretty sure this is Portsmouth. I think that's the tower of the church, the steeple of the church in the background. I don't know from where this was done, but it's certainly certainly a sketch that he did outside on location, and that's kind of cool. Here's a Britcher, Mule Island. And I've mentioned William Morris Hunt a couple times, so now we're going to look at his work. Hunt is an interesting character. He forms a very important link between American painting and French painting in the 19th century. He's the sole guy who sort of introduced America to Impressionism and to Barbizon painting also, which came before Impressionism. He was born in Vermont, and he was the son of a senator, and he got kicked out of Harvard for, I think, gambling or some other youthful indiscretions, and his parents sent him to Europe to straighten out. So that's what you did, and he went to the Dusseldorf School first and hated it, hated the whole approach. Dropped out, went to Paris, where he discovered French painting. And there he made friends with a number of the Barbizon painters like Millet, and was responsible for bringing them to America. He was a teacher in Boston at the Boston Museum School, and just he knew. I think he married into a Boston Brahmin family, and so he knew a lot of the money in Boston and would recommend art for them. And he would often recommend Monet and other Impressionists, and that is why the MFA has such a spectacular collection of Impressionists. Now, the idea of the French painting that was different was it was no longer about sort of the lofty, romantic, almost philosophical stance. It was more about being in the moment and seeing with fresh eyes that which is already close to hand. And it's pretty well illustrated by this painting, which is called The Ferry to Appledore. And I think it's interesting that it was once misnamed The Promised Land, because there, with that title, it takes on quite an allegorical character. These would be presumed immigrants coming to America, in the Promised Land. That's not what it is at all. It's just people on a ferry going out to the Shoals. The Impressionists looked at life around them, and that's what and found it worthy of painting in and of itself. You can see that Hunt's scene is not all that different from the way it is now. So here's also a difference between Hudson River School and the French school. Barbizon School was a group of artists who congregated in a small town in France, a little, in the, sort of this, beyond the suburbs of Paris. They sort of rejected the academic approach to painting and went back to nature directly, painting from observation, and thereby invented plein air painting, the notion that you could finish a painting out of doors, and laid the groundwork for Impressionism, which came shortly after, uh, simply because of the Barbizon painters who, who tutored the young Impressionists. And so in the top painting, you see a William Frost Richards example of Hudson River School painting, and below is by Gustave Courbet of the Barbizon School. And Courbet is really the first painter to paint this this iconic scene, simply waves washing up onto a beach. No giant storm, no wreck, barely, visible in one corner, no ship off in the horizon, just the ocean the way it looks when you stand there. And you can see the difference in the feeling between the William Frost Richards, the Hudson River School, which is all about this vastness and expanse. And there is a little tiny ship on the horizon there, giving us the scale of man in nature and the vastness and the majesty and the poetry. But there's poetry in the small and everyday as well, say the Barbizon painters and the French Impressionists. So William Morris Hunt was, again, really instrumental in this shift in American painting. Unfortunately, he had a tough time. His studio burned in I think it was 1874, maybe something like that, 77. A lot of his work was lost. He had a commission given to him to sort of that was supposed to sort of bring him out of his misery, and the commission failed. It was the interior of the dome of a state house in Albany, I think, and it started sort of flaking off before he even finished. So the work had to be scrapped, and it was Hunt that started coming out to see Celia Baxter and bringing painters and writers with him and evolving the salon there. And in 1879, he sketched this on Appledore, and it was his last work because he died 3 days afterwards, under sort of sad and mysterious circumstances. He was discovered face down in one of the shallow pools of water on Appledore, presumably drowned. But he was, but how do you drown in 2 or 3 feet of water unless it's deliberate? Hard to know. No one really knows if it was a suicide or not, for he didn't leave a note if it was. There he is at age 55, looking like age 85. So you can see he really, he did some hard living. Poor guy. Well, John Appleton Brown studied with Hunt, and this is one of his works, Trapdykes on the Shoals, Celia's Garden, very French. Another one by John Appleton Brown. This looks like a pastel. And the Boston School. So Child HASSAM, and American Impressionism. So HASSAM studied in Paris in the 1880s and started coming out to the Shoals in 1882. And these are paintings you're probably already familiar with. It was Celia who convinced Fred, which is his first name, to use the name Child, which I think was his middle name, which really comes from an English tradition. Uh, Lord Byron wrote Child Harold's Pilgrimage, uh, which was sort of like his, British invasion kind of bursting onto the scene work. And the word I hear, I think, is used to refer to somebody who's a young lord, somebody who hasn't come into their lordship yet, hasn't come of age, is still a child with an E. And so I think the link to the romantic hero of Byron's poem, Child Harold, induced Celia to convince him that he should go with Child HASSAM instead of Frederick. I wonder if that's the fairy back in the day. It looks like it might be, though it could be small to be a fairy. I'm not sure. I don't know. But I thought this was a cool painting, one that I don't see very often. So it's remarkable to see how faithful he was to what he saw, but also how poetically he was able to render it. And a couple of years ago, there's a book was put out. I don't have it, but many of his paintings are of easily identifiable areas on Appledore and Star. So somebody went and took photos from the exact spots where he painted them so that we could see them side by side. Beautiful what he does with the color in that one on the left. If you think about the one on the right, like those are the colors that we generally see when we're out there. On the left, he's really turned up the intensity and is playing around with the temperature quite a bit, like warm colors in the rocks at the base of the rocks where they meet the ocean, and cool in the rocks surrounding them and in the ocean out and back. And so it creates a vibrance as these warm and cool colors react against each other. And that's known as a broken color too, that impressionist technique of using little dabs of pigment next to each other. Rather than mixing a color on the palette, you put a blue next to a yellow and it vibrates into a green visually. So it's like visual mixing. There's an example of this, the location of the paintings. You can literally hold the painting up to the landscape and have it match up. Of course, none of this happens in a vacuum, and I wanted to show these two paintings side by side because the one on the right is by Child HASSAM, the one on the left is by Claude Monet. And it's interesting just how similar they are. Obviously, not exactly, but the idea, the central idea is the same. The composition is very much the same as well. And that goes for a lot of his paintings. The one on the right is one of his more famous Shoals paintings. And the one on the left is by Monet, again. And you can see just how similar they are in terms of the composition. Once more, you have foregrounded garden, red and white flowers, and a kind of window, U-shaped sort of portal that you look over the garden to a distant scene in both paintings. So a keen observer of Monet for sure. But it wasn't just Monet. He looked at all kinds of French painting. This is his painting of the interior of Celia's cottage on Appledore. And if you study the painting, you can see Celia herself, I imagine, or at least a woman, reclining right behind the vase of flowers in front, reading a book in a kind of flouncy pink dress. It took me a while to see that. I did not see that at first. But this also is indebted to a French painter, Vuillaume, who was famous for interiors, often with people reading. And you can see the same, it's got the same feeling, it's got the same, many of the same colors. So somebody once said to me, you know, originality, about the thing about originality is that you're only as original as your sources are obscure, which I thought was probably pretty true. Painting borrows from itself all the time. And not a lot of Americans knew French painting when, knew Monet when HASSAM was painting, or knew Vuillard at all for decades until, you know, after. So his paintings seem doubly revolutionary. But it is incredibly poetic in itself. I love these paintings of the moon, the sun, morning and moonrise. I saw these in Boston, and they're really just poems in paint. Just gorgeous. So simple, you know, but they're like these delicate screens through which another world shines through. This one has a very Van Gogh feel to it. This painting, West Wind, Appledore, has been called a perfect painting. I'm not sure exactly why, but it is a daring painting. Let me tell you, as a painter, to give that much space to the ocean, you know, and basically a 2D design, to not realistically render the waves, but to create an interesting pattern for the eye, is daring. It's just maybe 1/5 of the painting up in the top is scenery, and all the rest is design. And it's magnificent. It's gorgeous. That's a very gutsy painting. I don't think I'd have the guts to do that. It's very hard to keep the eye moving on that much open space. A much later painting, 1911, probably the year before he stopped going to the Shoals. And that is in Portsmouth too. I know where that fence is, and I suspect some of you might as well, and that's why I put it in. It's right by the, it's on State Street, right by the Strawberry Bank. And there's the cottage, nice colorized pic. We're moving on from Impressionism to another phase of American painting called tonalism. And this is a kind of loose movement, didn't really have much of a coherence during its day in the way that the Hudson River painters did, but there's identifiable style to it all. There's a certain reliance on the French Barbizon approach to painting. So you don't get the big expansive views. You don't get the romantic Storm and Drang of moonlight. I shouldn't say that. Moonlight is definitely a thing in tonalism, but you don't get all the sublime, the sublimity, and the drama. It's more like the world as you can experience it daily, but with again a kind of poetic revisioning of it. Tonalism is marked by a very limited palette, so not a wide variety of colors, but sort of quieter color harmonies. Cloudy days, moonlit. Watercolor. A lot of grays, but colorful grays. Still playing with warm and cool colors though, learned from Impressionism. This is a more typical tonalist painting, just called Moonlit Waves. Don't think it, it has nothing to do with the Isles of Shoals. I just put it in as a very good example of tonalism. I have a fondness for tonalism myself, and my work owes a lot to that movement. It's kind of the poetry of American painting, American landscape painting in a way. It really is about mood and suggestion, evocation, invocation, rather than faithful copying of nature. And there's a Burge Harrison tonalist approach to the shoals. The light is just barely visible out there in the gloom. Tonalism merges into modernism. And this is a painting from the 1930s. So we're going into the 20th century, well into the 20th century now. Olaf Bronner was a Norwegian who came and painted with Child HASSAM sometimes, but also on his own. This is a painting by Soren Emil Carlson, who was associated with Robert Henry and Charles Woodbury in the Woodbury, the Ogunquit School, or Ogunquit Art Colony, I guess I should call it, in the early 20th century. But he obviously painted on the shoals. And I find his work very poetic as well. The shoals. I love the big sky and the way this whole painting seems to just be sort of dissolving into light. These are some more Carlson's of that particular one. I'm not sure where that is. It may be the Bald Head Cliff in Maine. Wild moonlight there. He's another painter that I have admired and been influenced by. There's a painting here called View of the Isles of Shoals by Richard Haley Lever. I don't know anything about this guy, I have to say, except that he looks like he studied with John Marin, because that's the painting on the right is by John Marin, who was a Maine modernist. Watercolor and very sort of gestural, not realistic. A very modern approach to the rocks here. very almost abstract design to this. This is called Star Island, and I guess it's when, back in the day when there were fishing dories still around. I don't know where that would be, but I take it that it existed like that once, I hope. Anyway, this style of modernism is known as regionalism. Thomas Hart Benton, who painted the one on the left, was the protagonist here. And in fact, Jackson Pollock studied with Thomas Hart Benton, which is kind of interesting. And Pollock's early work resembles Benton's somewhat, although it's more violent and more psychological. But anyway, here it's all about the everyday, the sort of the common man was sort of being celebrated in American regionalism of the 30s. Donald Gordon Squire, 1970, owes something to that style, I think. And now we're getting into contemporary work. This is by John Hatch, who taught at University of New Hampshire for a long time. And this is an acrylic painting, very contemporary and abstract feeling. Really kind of beautiful. This is a more realistic painting by him. View from somebody knows, almost looks photographic at first. I like this one better, personally. And now I'm showing you contemporary painters, most of whom live on the seacoast area and come out to paint on the Shoals. Karen Blackwood, Lennie MULLANEY, and contemporary painting. I feel, especially contemporary landscape painting, owes a lot to the Impressionists. It's a kind of neo-impressionism, I think, because it's painting from life, it's painting the everyday as it appears, but basically painting the light and experimenting and being playful with color and gesture. Gesture being the visible brush stroke, the strokes that record the movement of the brush through the paint, and you don't try to hide that as a painter of this style. Alastair Dacey, on the other hand, owes more to, I think, the Boston school itself. He's very much a neo-impressionist. You can see here the broken color that he's used, and a big Child HASSAM fan. Most of these painters, well, not most, a number of them have studios in the Button Factory, which is a mill building in Portsmouth, where you can go see these works and see what they're up to during open studios that they have periodically. Bill PAARLBERG is a watercolorist and a longtime champion of the Shoals. Lisa NOONIS has a studio in Kittery and is she's showing nationally. She does abstract work as well as plein air work like this, and also, but mostly studio painting. But she goes out and does studies out on the Shoals. Really just sort of celebrating the paint, celebrating color, celebrating the act of painting itself. really verging on the abstract there. J. Blanchette. This is this style of painting is done with, not with the brush, but with palette knife. Palette knife is used to mix oil paints, but it can also be used to apply the paint. And you can tell when a painter's used the knife by the texture, the roughness of the texture in the paint. It's a wonderful alternative to brushing. It gives a whole new sense of freshness and vitality. T.M. Nicholas is very much a brush painter and in the child HASSAM mode for sure. Boston School. Tom Hughes, Seacoast painter, moved to California, just moved back. Straightforward paintings. John Stobart has done some beautiful work on the Shoals, and better known for his paintings of ships, marine paintings, but meticulous painter, really very detailed. Every plank of wood on that building, every shadow. And yet he creates a very harmonious compositions that really just kind of feasts for the eyes. Cindy House, I do not know much about. It's quite photographic. Marvelous rendering of the water, the bubbles, and the foam, and of course of the rocks too. But it's hard to get that kind of level of realism in water, in ocean water. So I think so. Another one of hers, pastel, incredibly. Gorgeous, huh? That one really puts you there. You can almost hear the gulls out on the ledges. Hannah Phelps does prints. So this is a very different approach, but also full of life. I like the light on this one. You get those blue shadows out there on the rocks, you know, and the warm glow of the sun certain times of day. Monique SEKELLARIOS lives out by me. I used to live on the seacoast, but I live further inland now, sadly, in Apple Orchard Country over in Hollis, New Hampshire. And she lives in Nashua, one town over. Big, bright palette. Carol ARONSON-SHORE, she's another button factory artist. She's been making these paintings of the cottages for years. They're fabulous. James Aponovich is a kind of photorealistic painter, and it's kind of weird that he would go out to the shoals and instead of painting the shoals, set up a still life and paint it. But that's just me. He did just paint the shoals too. I mean, here's work of his. I thought this is a wild painting. Appledore, the Atlantic, and the Theory of Gravitation. It's a really strange kind of painting, almost looks like another planet, but he is an illustrator at UMass and a geologist. So he's kind of a natural scientist and as well as an artist. So that's, I think, some of the strangeness can be put down to that. And Donald Journey, friend I've painted with a few times. Nice light effect. And Alexandre de Steiger, you probably know. Not a painter, obviously, a photographer, but just as artistic and amazing. Beautiful work. Alex has a book, Small Island, Big Picture. For those that don't know, she is the winter caretaker on Star Island. When everyone else is gone, she's the sole human sharing it with the gulls and white owls that come, and she photographs it. She also writes music. Just a few more contemporaries. Wendy Turner. And a kind of review of some of the ground we covered. Started with the European influence on American painting and German Romanticism through the Dusseldorf School, which leads into the Hudson River School. And then the disruption of Impressionism, French painting, largely through Hunt, who comes out with Child HASSAM to create the salon at Celia's place. Then we looked at the turn of the century style of tonalism into modernism of the 20th century, and then we looked at a smattering of contemporary painters. I'm going to show you a few of mine and talk about the different influences that were behind them. This one's called The Music of the Waves, and when I painted this, I was definitely thinking about Child HASSAM. I was thinking about Impressionism, and I was experimenting with the technique of broken color, taking colors and putting them next to each other rather than mixing them. Here is more of a Barbizon style, where I'm painting what I can see in a kind of like intimate sort of recording of the visual information. There's a great quote from Hawthorne about the Shoals, and he was a visitor to Celia's cottage as well. It seems as if some of the massive materials of the world remained superfluous after the creator had finished and were carelessly thrown down here, where the millionth part of them emerged from the sea, and in the course of thousands of years have become partially bestrewn with a little soil, which is pretty accurate. And that's one of the things I love about Starr and that I've painted. I've tried to paint that feeling of the almost casual chaos of rock that you can see out there. That feeling of like God just having sort of taken the remnants that were left over after creating the world and throwing them out there to the ocean, and there they are. This was a palette knife painting. You can tell by all of the sharp lines. I used a brush for the sky, for the clouds though, to get them wispy like that. And Celia also comments on the same: rifts and chasms, roughly piled gorges, and square quarries of stone and stairways cut as if by human hands. The trap rock, softer than the granite, is worn away in many places, leaving the bare perpendicular walls 15 or 20 feet high. In some places, the geologist will tell you, certain deep scratches in the solid rock mean that here the glacier ground its way across the world's earlier stages. Just getting into the primal, you know, the chasms and rough surfaces. That's what I love about painting there. And that's what I think, as I said, that's what I think draws so many creative souls to the islands. It's because it is so elemental. It's nature pared down to the simplest elements, just rock, air, ocean, sparse vegetation. On the left is a plein air painting I made, and on the right, a color study of the water. That's what you, I don't know if you've ever done it, but when you're walking from the ferry up, when you first arrive on Star and you look to the right, the rocks have this seaweed clinging to them, and you get this beautiful gradation of warm and cool colors there. So that's what I painted. This painting, I'm pretty sure, owes a lot to Emil Carlsen, whom I showed you earlier, the guy with the big poetic skies. There's that same feeling of light sort of dissolving everything. At least that's what I was going for, I think. This is a great quote by Barbara Stafford, an art historian. She's talking about Ruskin's book, Modern Painters. And she says, modern painters is rife with examples of the two eternities, those being the vacancy and the rock, pitted against transitory manifestations, the colored gradations of clouds, sunsets, and storms. These opposites, these two eternities, the vacancy and the rock, through their reconciliation, would transcend the beauty of material things by adding their force to individual consciousness. Hard to follow, perhaps, but I do love the idea of the two eternities, the there and the not there, the rock, which is eternally there, and the air, which is eternally not there, the vacancy. And I see those as being and non-being in a way. And this is a charcoal that I did out on Appledore that I was consciously trying to paint being and non-being together. The vacant, I never, this is before I saw that quote, but that's exactly what I was going for. The two eternities, vacancy and rock. Being and non-being, being and nothingness. That's what the shoals give us in abundance. Just a few more small plein air sketches I did out there on Star and Appledore. The one on the top right there, a little 6x8, I did on Appledore on location. I worked it up into this one in the studio, a 30x40, called Eternal Appledore. I was going for that feeling of the intermingling of the elements, which happens out there too. the way the sea and the sky and the land seem to mix up into each other. So dissolve and go in and out of each other, and in and out of existence, in and out of time and eternity. It's probably my most sort of modern, as in the sense of, you know, contemporary modernism, at any rate. This is me leading this is my plein air painting class. I took this picture, so I'm not in it, but in 2015, a bunch of painters went out there with me, and I swear it could be 1915. That's the magic of Star. It's timeless. And this is a more recent workshop. The rocks and the sea are the few things that do not change, and they are wonderfully beautiful, more so than ever. So that's it. That's my presentation for you. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm perfectly willing to take any questions you might have. Comments?
Thank you, Chris. This is Bill Edwards. We really needed this, and it was wonderful.
Oh, good.
You have added so much to our enrichment of life and a long connection with the Isles of Shoals. So I want to thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's great to hear.
Thank you, Chris. Just a
You're
beautiful
welcome.
presentation and very inspiring. Makes me want to
Awesome.
go out and paint now.
Good. Yeah. Me too. Makes me want to get out there right now. Get out the brush and palette.
Right.
We miss Star Island.
Oh, we do. Oh, I painted there with Doris Rice's class, and I plan to go back this year. And of course, no Star Island.
You can't see me.
Pardon?
So, thank you so much. It's a wonderful presentation. Cynthia Burmeister.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Today's the day I would have been returning from Star. I would have gotten home just about this time of day, having just gotten off the ferry a little while ago.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. This is Doris Rice, and
hi,
we're on Monhegan.
You're on
No, that's
Monhegan, right?
background.
Yes.
The other island.
You are
Yes.
the Doris?
Yeah, Monhegan Island.
Hi.
Oh, and jealous. Thank you for joining.
Oh, wow.
I'm so happy we have Wi-Fi now.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Chris, this was just a wonderful presentation. I feel like my freshman year of college when I took my first Western Civ course, and I understood from beginning to end what I understand from beginning to end, and it was just marvelous. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chris. I haven't met you, but I really feel as though I know you better. And you've taught us, you really took us through all the different periods of art, and that was a great help too. I paint also, but I've, was enriched a lot today from your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We hope we can get to see some of the paintings that you talked about. The emo guy sounded real. I really like to see his stuff. So I guess I just look it up and see where they are and where you are, where your stuff is hanging. Where are you? Yeah.
Oh, I have in Portsmouth at Kennedy Gallery.
Okay,
You can
good.
see my work. Yeah.
Great.
I also have a website, christophervolpe.com, but I don't have a lot of landscapes on there. I've been doing some more sort of conceptual work recently, so you'll see that too.
Okay. Look.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Christopher. Your work is beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. Wonderful job. And I've got my child has the book from the Peabody Essex exhibition. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you too. I'm not an artist, but I just feel like this was a wonderful trip. It was a wonderful trip through history. It's like you told history through art on the show. Thank you. And they were lovely, all of them.
Yeah, it's really feast for the eyes, huh?
Truly.
So nice.
Truly.
Yeah.
You have a gift. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. It's nice to see all the different interpretations of Star of the Islands.
Yeah.
Especially when we can't be there this year. So it's great to see. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Tim, for making this very easy for me. So you were great.
Thank you, sir, and thank you all for joining us today.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.